I'm going to let me get this going here. There we go. Well, first of all, I wanted to say good afternoon or good morning to everyone, wherever you are in Cyberland. I wanted to acknowledge being able to come there to visit your homelands wherever you are, and from where I am now. And it's with the wonders of technology, we're able to do that. So it's my pleasure today to be able to spend some time with you to talk about joint jurisdiction healing to wellness courts and the basics of joint jurisdiction. And in order to go through what some of those basics are, what we're going to do is take a trip back in time a bit to the very first joint jurisdiction wellness courts. And I started out before I was appointed as a judge in the 9th Judicial District for state courts. I was a tribal court judge for the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe for close to 10 years. And during that time, we created the very first joint jurisdiction courts in the nation. And as you'll see, as we go forward with today's presentation, we really did discover that together everyone achieves more. And by working together under joint jurisdiction agreements between tribal courts and state courts, we're really able to get a lot done and achieve more than we might be able to on our own and come up with new creative solutions, as you'll see. So let's start off first of all, so that we're all sort of talking the same language about what joint jurisdiction is. And joint jurisdiction is exercised when a tribal court, jointly when a tribal court judge and a state or federal court judge come together to exercise their respective authority simultaneously, bringing together justice system partners and leveraging resources to promote healing and protect public safety. And for those of you who may be appearing from way up north in the Alaska and places like that, what I like to think of it, use the analogy of the Iditarod sled dog race, where we all have the same goals that we're trying to achieve, as we'll see as we talk about today. And what we've done, we're all trying to reach that, no matter which system that we work for. And so what we're doing is taking all of our authority from one system and the other system, and working together where we can under joint jurisdiction agreements. So why would we do that? And tribal courts are definitely one of the most visible exercises of tribal sovereignty that we have. And so a lot of people say, well, why would we work with the state court or local courts under joint jurisdiction? And it's a very valid question, and one that we got when we very first started. And why would we work with the state court? And so one of the things that we discovered through our first work at joint jurisdiction courts, with Leech Lake and Cass and Itasca counties, and it's carried through with other courts that have created their own programs since then, is that we are able to really leverage resources that are there. We all know these days that money's tight, and we're all scrambling to try to achieve grants and things like that to be able to get that to do the work that we need to do. And so we found that by coming together under joint jurisdiction, that we're really able to leverage the resources that are there and make them stronger. And it also opens up new funding sources. We found that there were funding sources that were available for the state that we were able to access through our joint jurisdiction that the tribe wouldn't have had available to it, and vice versa. There was things that the tribe was able to make available to supplement what we were doing, and it really increased the services that were available for everyone. And for the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe, it really allowed the tribe to have a hand in healing and protect public safety. As you'll see, at that time when I first started, the Leech Lake Band wasn't exercising any criminal jurisdiction, and because Minnesota's Public Law 280, the tribal court wasn't really involved in those cases, as we'll see. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. But another benefit, and one of the reasons that to exercise jurisdiction jointly, is to promote cultural understanding. It can really eliminate some of that us versus them attitude, even in places where the relationships have not been good. It can really promote that and help to build and strengthen relationships. It also helps to strengthen services to families. Again, there may be certain services that the tribe is not able to provide, that by working together, it opens up all of that avenue. We like to think of it in terms of creating a safety net for our families. And when we have all of the resources of the tribal court and the state court, and we're putting those together to really create a safety net. So services are definitely strengthened for families. And we've also found that one reason to exercise joint jurisdiction was that it increases public trust and confidence in we found that not only in confidence in the tribe's own tribal court, but between justice partners and in the system itself. And importantly, we were able to expand the types of cases that we were involved in beyond what we could do with the resources that we had available at that time. And importantly, also, another reason to exercise jurisdiction jointly is to really affect recidivism. Those are some of the things that we're trying to do, is to lower recidivism rates and keep people coming back through that revolving door of the criminal and juvenile justice systems. So those are some of the reasons why you might want to exercise joint jurisdiction. So what are some of the essential elements if you're going to create a joint jurisdiction court? Well, leadership is definitely key, and it's strong judicial leaders have been proven in not only the Leech Lake Court tribal joint jurisdiction courts, but also in courts that have been developed since that time, that leaders among the judges that created these programs, as well as their partners and the other people that were part of these planning teams, was really crucial for development. It does sometimes help to have judges bringing people together. They say we have the power to convene, and so we're able to really bring people to the table that might not otherwise get there. And another element that has seen in these joint jurisdiction courts is that technical assistance is essential. That was something that, as you'll see, we didn't really have the benefit of when we first started the joint jurisdiction courts. But since that time, there's been a lot of technical assistance, providers, and tools that are available for those of you that may be looking at doing your own joint jurisdiction courts in the future. Joint jurisdiction courts also blend everything that we know about healing to wellness and problem-solving court approaches. It really blends them into a new system that you're creating between justice partners. So it's taking the best, I think, of all worlds from the healing to wellness and problem-solving approaches. And importantly, it's also tailored to fit specific culture and local court systems. And that's really important because, as we all know, every tribe is not the same. And even tribes that are geographically located closely, their communities or reservations, there may be big differences between those tribes. And so it's really important that these courts are able to be tailored to fit those specific cultural norms of the tribe and also the local court systems. So basically, we found that whatever is needed, it can be addressed on a local level, so they can really be tailored locally. And they really get down to focus on the root causes of problems, whereas you may just, in the typical criminal system, may be dealing with probation violations or sort of the symptoms of the problem. With joint jurisdiction courts, you're really able to get down to focus on the root causes of trauma and substance abuse and other issues to really be able to break cycles. And if where you work is like the places where I've worked and been, a lot of times we have silos not only between the tribe and the state, but even sometimes within our own organizations, that there might be silos between departments and divisions within a tribe, and that they're not collaborating and they're not sharing information. And so this is one way to really break down those silos and improve collaboration. And as you'll see, that those silos and improved collaboration, it's not just between the justice partners. We found that happens as sort of a byproduct of this, and it affects other systems, and things improve along the way. And it also results in improved outcomes and positive changes for families. Whoops, sorry about that. And we've seen children that are returned more quickly to their homes, and people that get driver's license. So just the outcomes across the board seem to be much better when we're working together and able to bring all of the tools from both systems. And these joint jurisdiction courts, they also apply sustainability and quality control strategies. And it's important that going forward, we can get creative about how we're going to sustain our programming, especially, in light of the fact that there can be resource issues and infrastructure issues. And so it's really a way to apply sustainability and make sure that you're continually improving what you're doing. And the other thing that we found is that all of the courts have similar challenges that they face in terms of staffing and the geographic distances, planning, funding. Some of the same themes come up over and over again, which actually, for those of you that are looking at doing your own joint jurisdiction courts, is really an opportunity to learn from the people and the programs that have come before you, and to really turn some of those challenges into opportunities. So I want to share a video next, and we're going to kind of start. This was for our 10-year anniversary for the wellness courts with Leech Lake and Itasca County and Cass County. And so this is a video from our 10-year anniversary that we had. So I'm going to go ahead and play that video for you.
The Leech Lake Bend of Ojibwe and the Cass County Wellness Court celebrated a milestone today. Josh Peterson has more from the ceremony.
Formed in 2006, the Leech Lake Cass County Wellness Court was the first joint jurisdiction wellness court in the nation. The Wellness Court is a post-conviction, post-sentencing DWI court founded on the 10 principles of drug courts. The court handles the cases of both tribal members and non-Indians, and today celebrated not only 10 years of the court, but also a brand new building.
This is pretty overwhelming, and I'm really glad to be a part of it and to see it go so well the way that it did today.
With natural light filling the room, a drumming group played special music to congratulate those who graduated from the program. It's success stories like these graduates who leave these judges with a good feeling of knowing that 10 years ago, this revolutionary program has played a major role in changing so many lives.
So I think that the reach of healing and turning around and becoming sober and becoming well is really fairly significant.
To see the program come so far, other communities across the United States have taken notice of the wellness court success and now are implementing similar programs in their court systems.
Together, everyone achieves more. And so we've helped other courts set up in California with the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok and El Dorado County Superior Court.
Looking to the future, there remains only high hopes for the program and to see a broader joint effort between tribes and the state.
I think it shows the willingness of people to cooperate and make things work for people, because we all have common goals.
In Cass Lake, Josh Peterson, Lakeland News.
The ceremony also included a pipe presentation as well as a blessing of the pipe and a feast.
It's a Lakeland Public Television.
So that's where we ended up at our 10-year anniversary. So we're going to go back a little bit farther in time and to the very beginning. And as we all know, with our reservations these days, and a lot of the reality of our geography and where we are, is that issues don't stop at the jurisdictional, at the border. And a lot of our reservations and communities are checkerboarded. And so we have both tribal members and non-Indians and members of other tribes that reside within our boundaries. And so we know that poverty, addiction, and hopelessness know no jurisdictional boundaries. And we have the same people that are going back and forth across those imaginary boundaries that doesn't stop these issues. And so these are really community issues that are affecting everyone who lives on our reservations, in our tribal communities, and in the surrounding communities. So to give you an idea geographically, because we always talk about geography a lot, right? For, what will work where we are. So this is a map of the state of Minnesota, and you can see in the upper portion where the outline, that's Minnesota's 9th Judicial District. And so it's the biggest judicial district in the state of Minnesota. As you can see, it's basically almost the top half of the state of Minnesota. And there are also 4 reservations that are within the boundaries of the 9th District. So you can see here where the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe Reservation is, and the Cass County District Court and Itasca County District Court in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and Walker, Minnesota. And so they're pretty much in the central area. It's a huge district, and it's transportation, housing, substance use issues, trauma. I mean, those are the types of things that we see across the board, and the challenges of that geography make it hard for either system to really accomplish what they need to and get the results that they need to working alone. Minnesota, for those of you that may not know, is a public law 280 state. And so all of the historically for all but a couple of the tribes here, all of the criminal cases are going through state court. And so many of the tribes are not exercising any kind of criminal jurisdiction. They've not retroceded. And so those tribal courts are not handling any of those cases. And all of those are going through the state district court. And that was no different in Cass County and Itasca County that overlap with the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe Reservation. And at the time we got started, and unfortunately still today, Native Americans are overrepresented in both the juvenile and adult justice systems, really at every stage of the process. And at the time we got started, and this is the statistics are not too far off from this, but 21.7, almost 22% of incarcerated youth are Native American. And that's when you're talking about a statewide population, Native American population of approximately 2%. So it's, as you can see, the disparity numbers are alarming. And as I said, Native Americans are only about 2% of Minnesota's population, but at the time we started, they accounted for 32% of arrests, of all arrests in northern Minnesota, made up 26% of the people that are on felony probation in Minnesota Department of Corrections Northern District, which includes our area. There are 47% of the people that are on felony probation in the 9th District are Native American. And at the time, at least, Minnesota had the dubious distinction of having more Native Americans on probation than any other state. So that is a product of that revolving justice system that we see. Cass County, which is one of the counties that overlaps with the Leech Lake Reservation, between 2000 and 2006 saw a 21% increase in felony DWIs, and the county had the worst outcomes in the state for children. And for this age group, you can see that it was first in the state for sexually active teens, second for out-of-home placements and attempted suicides, third for drinking and driving, and third for children living in poverty. And so there were a lot of issues, social issues that, were not only having to do with DWIs and substance use issues, but as you can see, it was affecting out-of-home placements and other issues that involve our kids and families. Itasca County, which is also one of the counties that overlaps with the reservation, in 2004 saw a huge increase in methamphetamine use and costs. So in 2004, meth caused a 33% increase in jail costs, and 94% of the people that were booked into jail in July of 2005 either had meth in their system or in their possession. 64% of felony drug charges involved meth, and that increased to 57%. And in 2008, Itasca County was added to the list of 13 deadliest counties in Minnesota. And so that was sort of the lay of the land, the way things were with the counties that overlap with the Leech Lake Reservation before we started the Joint Jurisdiction Court. The Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe's tribal court was started in the 70s as a conservation court and developed over time. So by the 1980, the court was handling Indian Child Welfare Act, child protection cases. And then by 2006, when I was hired as the tribal judge, we were handling civil and traffic, conservation, housing, child protection cases, your dog at large type things, truancy, minor consumptions, curfew cases, and these were all under TCAP funding through the Bureau of Justice. And so we were expanding what we were doing, and in 2009 and 10 went further to add family law and divorce and custody cases, probate, tax code. But still, even though we were building our jurisdiction and the types of cases incrementally, we really didn't have the infrastructure to be able to do everything that we wanted to do because we were building over time. And the one thing that we did have, thanks to some of the funding that we had, was that we were able to set up a video conferencing system and use technology. So the Leech Lake Tribal Court was on the same system as the state of Minnesota for what used to be called ITV. That's way before our days of Zoom. But we were on the same system as the state courts and administrative offices. And so we were able to be a certified location for people to appear for court. And so we were really able to make a lot of use to connect the systems through this video conferencing system. So that was kind of the lay of the land between the systems back when we got started. And even though we were working on some different types of cases and the tribal court had a different approach than the state court, we really had common goals. And both systems wanted fewer children in out-of-home placement. We wanted to address the disproportionate minority contact and reduce that. And of course, address the epidemic of drug and alcohol abuse that we were seeing on the reservation. You saw some of those statistics. I think there was also at one time, I think they said upwards of 90% of the residents of the Leech Lake Reservation had been either directly affected or had drug and alcohol issues of their own. And so it was truly epidemic. And of course, both systems wanted to reduce the number of DWIs and traffic fatalities, because the reality of it was that the people that were coming through that revolving door in the state court system many of them were Leech Lake band members. And there were people that were traffic fatalities, people that were dying, even walking along the side of the road. And so these were both things that both systems were trying to address, albeit in sort of different ways. And so what we came up with was this idea of Bamanim Anishinabeg, which translates as care for the people. And so under our Bamanim Anishinabeg program, we developed some different programming under our joint jurisdiction agreements. And really what started off as trying to do one thing together, which was in a DWI court, it blossomed and grew into all of these other things that we'll talk about. So the joint jurisdiction adult wellness courts started the first in 2006 with Leech Lake and Cass County. And then a year later, we started with Leech Lake and Itasca County. Both of these courts are based on the components of drug courts and DWI courts, and basically would look like a healing to wellness court, but with joint jurisdiction with both judges, both systems working together. So in these joint jurisdiction wellness courts, we had a state court judge and a tribal court judge. We had the county attorney, since of course these cases were criminal cases that started through the state system. So the county attorney was involved. And then we had a public defender on our team, and public defense was provided and still is by Regional Native Public Defense Corporation, which is an alternative defense, public defense corporation in Minnesota that provides services for tribal members. And then probation and supervision is provided by the Minnesota Department of Corrections and county probation. Law enforcement is both county and Leech Lake Tribal Police are involved. And then treatment and assessments are provided both by Leech Lake providers as well as private treatment providers. And then the 9th Judicial District and county probation are the ones that helped us with the coordination and our technical, the MIS type end of things, to help maintain our databases and so forth. And these were the first joint tribal state jurisdiction wellness courts in the nation that we began. So with the Cass County Leech Lake Court, we started in 2006. And again, this was what we picked as far as the goal that we wanted to achieve to work together, was to address alcohol-related crashes and deaths in Cass County. And so because these issues don't stop at the jurisdictional boundaries, the program was opened up for both tribal members and non-Indians that lived on the reservation, on or near the reservation, because these are issues that really affect all of us. So it truly was a multi-jurisdictional, multi-agency participation in this first program. And we operated on a handshake for over a year. And I think that when we got started, we thought, well, surely somebody's doing this. There has to be a tribal court and a state court that are working together for better outcomes, because it just made sense to us. But as we got started, we realized that we were the model. And so we had to develop things as we went along in terms of our agreements. And there was funding that Cass County had received for their DWI court. And so we came behind and created all of those documents, but we just got started and basically operated on a handshake for over a year. Our wellness court teams, we talked about this a little bit about who all was a part of those teams, and this continues today with the courts have remained in continuous operation since they first started. And we still have the same players that are at the table for both of these courts. So as you can see, it's basically like a healing to wellness court team or a drug court team or a DWI court team, but we have players from both systems that come together on an equal basis to share in decisions and to run this court together. And it was amazing, some of the success stories that we saw with these first courts, and beyond our wildest dreams. Again, we wanted to address DWIs and try to break that cycle as far as reducing recidivism. But we found that we had a participant that might be, one member of a family, but then their spouses started to come and they started to see a benefit from this. And so people were actually starting to be reunited with their children and families outside of even our wellness court, but the whole family started to see benefits with this. And people were able to get their driver's licenses. We had one participant in the first wellness court, and he was in his 30s and had not had a valid license since he was 16 and had had a number of DWIs in the meantime. But he was able to get his driver's license for the first time in all that time. And he's not the only one. We had many of our folks that were able to become licensed drivers. They were able to get enrolled in school and to get jobs. And again, that helped because having both systems involved, there were things and resources that on the state court end of things, we might be able to help provide. And again, also on the tribal court end of things to help with things like employment and getting people enrolled in school. And it was interesting too, when people started to be empowered and to heal on their own, we saw improvements in what had been formerly abusive relationships, that people were able to make changes out of this. And I was always, as we would do our wellness court reviews and things, I would always like to add up the number of days that all of our participants had. And it was the participants, I'm not sure what the exact number of days right now is for the folks that are in the courts, but we're talking tens of thousands of days of documented sobriety for the 30-some people that are in the courts at any one time. Importantly, we saw a reduction in recidivism. It works. We achieve more when we work together. And for instance, we had a program with the Leech Lake Cass County program that recidivism was as low as 6.6%, and with the Itasca Leech Lake Joint Jurisdiction Court around 16%. And that was at the time looking at a national and Minnesota average of 60+% of recidivism. And so as you can see, that's a huge reduction that we saw in people coming back through the system. And it also resulted in millions of dollars that were saved both on incarceration costs and out-of-home care costs, because both systems were really creating that safety net for people and avoiding some of those, the things that happen to make that exacerbates problems that we have if people are incarcerated or if children are out of home. So that was able to be avoided. And that program worked so well that we started to look at other ways that we might be able to expand our joint programming. And one of the things that we found was that a lot of the people that were in the courts, our participants, also had other types of cases that were pending, including child protection cases. And so we decided that we would do a family drug court track. And so what we did was it was kind of an adjunct to the first joint jurisdiction wellness courts. And we created the family drug court. And so the participants might have child protection cases either in tribal court or state court to be able to be referred and get into the family drug court. And again, it was open to tribal members and non-Indians living on the reservation because these issues affected everyone. And so the entry point for this particular programming and part of the joint jurisdiction work was through the joint jurisdiction wellness court. So those participants would come in through there, and if there were also child protection issues, then they might be diverted over to this family drug court track to be able to work together in that. And again, it was both systems that were working together to provide all those resources and really ramp up what can be done to help people. And that was another area. We saw that there was a benefit and that it was working for people. And so one of the other areas that was developed under joint jurisdiction was juvenile diversion programming. And so typically, as we saw from the earlier slide, Leech Lake was developing programming over time and expanding the number of cases and types of cases. But we didn't have our own diversion program. There was a lot of areas that we just didn't have the infrastructure and weren't doing at that time. And the Cass County had its own juvenile diversion program for first-time juvenile offenders, and they would go through and see their diversion board, and then their recidivism rate was high. I mean, that was people came back through, and it wasn't, terribly successful, but it did okay. But when we created a joint jurisdiction diversion program, we opened that up to tribal members and non-Indians on the Leech Lake Reservation. So even if they were non-Indians, if they were started out in the Cass County diversion program, they could opt to come to Leech Lake's juvenile diversion program. And so we didn't have the resources to have anyone to really be able to supervise on the delinquency cases, and didn't have money for that. We didn't have probation, we didn't have case managers, we didn't have anyone at that time to really be able to provide that. And so we were working together with Cass County Probation under the adult wellness courts already. And so we found that we could get the supervision that we needed in tribal court and kind of put the teeth in things, if you will, by getting some help from Cass County Probation, since they were working with these same families and these same youth. So again, these diversion cases were starting out in Cass County and probation was involved in them. So what we did was we did a cross appointment order. And so as a judge, I appointed Cass County Probation to act as probation in tribal court. And under that cross appointment order, they were able to provide some of those services to us, and it didn't cost the tribe anything. They were already working with some of these same families, and so they were able to just carry that through and be able to work under that cross appointment order. And then we had our own diversion board that was made up of Leech Lake band members, and we did have some help from Cass County, again, for the supervision portion of things. But when the families came, we had a circle format that we used and tried to really have a family problem-solving approach and really focus on that. And so this is an example of how you can infuse culture into things. And so rather than just giving a kid community service or a slap on the hand or something like that, what they had to do was they had to come and meet with our diversion board in the circle. And we had an elder and someone from law enforcement and, from different areas, someone from social services that made up this circle. And so the youth would come in and they'd have to bring a parent or someone else that was an important person to them. And they were given a poster that had the 7 grandfathers, the Anishinaabe values on it. And so those youth were their consequence was that they were to take that poster and they were to go learn about one of those values. They could pick any one they wanted or all of them, and talk to their elders, talk to their family members, and they were supposed to come back and do a presentation for the board and bring their family, that family member back with them. And it was amazing some of the things that people talked about that they were able to learn, not even knowing that about their own Anishinaabe culture. And so it got really families starting to talk about other things and starting to kind of promote that in their family as well. And it worked. And when we saw the recidivism rate for the Cass County's diversion program was somewhere in the 36% range, it was, pretty close to 36 or 40%. When people, and this is all the people that came through, tribal members and non-Indians, that recidivism rate dropped from over 35, between 35 and 40% down to about 23%, which is, it's significant, the drop that came back. So we found that by working together again, that we were able to make significant changes in people's lives. And so things worked really well with the diversion program, but then we also had a number of kids that were involved in delinquency cases, and those cases may have been pending in Cass County District Court, or they may have been opened up in tribal court. But again, the courts were already working together under this joint powers agreement. And so we started to look at how we could work together on delinquency cases. And so one of the things, and this is an example of how each system has different tools and how when you put those together that you can really increase what you're able to do, is that in Minnesota under state jurisdiction, the focus is on the youth, and there's not as much jurisdiction and things that we can order parents to do in state court. However, in tribal court, our codes were different, and I had expanded jurisdiction over parents. So by working together, we were able to really increase the types of things that we were able to order and make a change for the parents as well, and order them to do things. Because as we all know, a lot of times, we can send kids away for treatment, but if things don't happen differently at home, then things aren't going to change. But we created individualized service plans for each one of these youth that were in the delinquency program. And through grant funding, we were able to create our own system of case management. And we had tribal court case managers who provided services to the family. And then Cass County Probation provided the supervision end of things, kind of the teeth of it, as I said. And for instance, if we needed to do testing for to see if someone was using drugs or alcohol, then they were able to help assist with that. And other sort of the supervisory type things, they were able to help with that. And again, this also saw significant decreases in recidivism for families that were working and youth that were in our joint jurisdiction delinquency program. And that worked so well. Again, I mean, we picked one thing that we thought we could work together on, and we kept finding all these other opportunities, and local, it showed what local need was for different things. And so a lot of times, because we didn't have resources locally for instance, for mental health or substance abuse placements for youth, they would be sent sometimes far away from home, even out of state sometimes, for treatment services. And so there needed to be something to help them for reentry when they were coming back into the community. And so again, the cases could start either in state court or tribal court. And if there was a youth that was placed involuntarily for either an inpatient treatment or at a detention facility, those were our criteria, those kids that were being placed. And so we were under the joint powers work. Cass County Probation provided the risk and needs assessments, and then notified Leech Lake when we had someone that might be a candidate or was going to be sent for either inpatient or detention through the state court. And then through funding, we were able to create a wraparound care coordination system and those wraparound services that are so needed. So we had a care coordinator and we had advocates that worked in the tribal court, and they would begin working with that youth and their family even before they were placed and before they were sent for their placements. And then that continued, and the contact was continued and check-ins while they were in placement. And our team members were involved in that programming. And then we were able to have a smooth and a warm transition back home when they returned home. So we were able to also see great results on this reentry program. So how did we do all of this? And I think that it's, I said we started off just with a handshake. And when it was working so well, that people started to want to get copies of things. And so we figured that we should put something in writing that would be able to benefit others besides just our documents that we had for the grant that Cass County had to come up with. And so we created a joint powers agreement between the tribal court and the state court. So that was really one of our foundational documents. That same joint powers agreement that we signed in 2006, the wording in that agreement has continued, even though all of the judges have changed. All of the original judges that were on the state court bench when we started, they've all changed. There's all new judges in the tribal court. And so when they've redone that joint powers agreement, it's the same language. And basically it's all of 52 words, 7 lines, just that the two systems agree to work together and that they will exercise their authority simultaneously where they can towards a set of common goals. And there are several things that are spelled out. And that's sort of the overarching agreement that we have. Then there's the support, because that's one question that people ask. Well, it's great if the court's going to do that, but what does tribal council think, or the board of commissioners? I mean, how, is there support there? And so that was the next thing that we had in terms of foundational documents, were resolutions that were passed by the tribal council in support of this work, and also the resolutions by the boards of commissioners for Cass and Itasca counties that supported and indicated that they were really, that they wanted this work to go forward and were supportive of it. We also had the cross appointment orders, which I talked about, that between probation and the tribal court. So they were able to act as our probation agents in tribal court. And then we had the memorandum of understanding for our team members in the wellness court. Basically just, roles and responsibilities. Just think of what you might have in any healing to wellness court for people's roles and what they've agreed to do. And so we had those memorandum of understanding. And then we also developed interagency agreements, for instance, between the tribal court and the Leech Lake Human Services Department. Because again, I think that was one of the areas where there was a lack of communication, or that there may have been some siloing. And so we came up with an interagency agreement for sharing information, and not only to working together under our joint jurisdiction courts, but also on other things to be able to share information and to really provide those services that people need to heal. And then, of course, we had our participant contracts for the folks that were in these programs, that they understood what they were signing up for when they did this, and had those program contracts. So this grew into so much more. As I said, we picked one thing that we could work together on, and all of these other agreements came out of that because we were able to work together so well. And so there was a joint powers agreement with the state for police services on the wellness court. So we used that, and there was an agreement for Leech Lake to be providing for knock-in chats and things like that for our wellness court participants. One of the other things that we didn't have in tribal court were guardians ad litem or CASA volunteers and someone to provide that service. It's huge. It's so important. We didn't have the money. We didn't have any program to do that. We had a little bit of money that we were able to put together towards something. So instead of creating our own program, we were able to do a contract with the 9th Judicial District. And that program, when it was in charge of the guardian ad litems and their 9th District program, we were able to contract with them. So now we had guardians ad litem at our disposal in tribal court. That was another agreement that came out of this. And I mentioned a bit ago about the interactive video conferencing that we had in tribal court. And not only were people able to use that to tune in for tribal court cases, but we were able to allow people to appear in our court and be hooked up to state court proceedings. And it was also in the same system. So people, incarcerated parents, could appear by ITV, not only for their court cases, but also for their child protection hearings and even video visits and things. I mean, we found so many uses for that. And we had a memorandum of agreement between Cass County and Leech Lake for the wellness court and the juvenile restorative justice programs. As part of that, the Leech Lake tribal flags were presented to the Cass County Boards of Commissioners, or Cass County Board of Commissioners. And the flags had been installed in the courtrooms in the courts of Itasca and Cass counties also. And so it really started to kind of spread that goodwill. And I think that historically, between Leech Lake and Cass County especially, they had a history of decades of very tense relationships, including tax cases and the county fighting the tribe's fee to trust applications, you name it. They didn't agree on anything. But when people started to see the benefit that was being gained by working together, the tribal council and the boards of commissioner for Cass and Itasca County, they actually started to have joint meetings. And this sort of spread beyond the courtroom. And today they still do. They work on joint road projects and things that are of common concern to both communities. And then we already talked about the cross appointment orders for the probation agents. So what were some of the benefits that we saw? I mean, I think we talked about that for the resources and, some of these other things to be able to stop that revolving door. There was so much more that we found that became a benefit of this, that it really was able to strengthen those services. And I want to give an example of how working together like this can change the climate, not just in the work that's going on in the courtroom or between agencies, but how this actually spreads out to the community. And when we talk about cultural understanding and increasing public trust and confidence, those things, I just want to give you a couple of examples. So we had a graduate from our Leech Lake Itasca County Wellness Court program, and he's a guy from the community of Ball Club, one of the communities on the Leech Lake Reservation. And at his wellness court graduation, he brought a guy that had gone to AA meetings that he'd met. It was a non-Indian guy from the area. And so his friend got up to speak at the graduation, and he said, the guy's name was Curtis, our graduate. So when I first met Curtis, I said, I immediately didn't like him because my dad had always told me, and I grew up knowing that nothing ever good ever came out of Ball Club. And so I knew you were from Ball Club, so I immediately didn't like you. But by working together through this program and seeing the changes that you've made, he said, my kids aren't going to grow up thinking that nothing good comes out of Ball Club. They'll know that good things come there. So you can really see how it can change the whole fabric of what's going on in society and culture. And in terms of increasing public trust and confidence, I'll also say that before we started with our joint jurisdiction work, there wasn't a lot of understanding about or confidence in tribal courts here. And I think that that's not it's not uncommon. I think that's maybe a common sentiment, unfortunately, a lot of places. And so when we first started to go out to tell other jurisdictions and what we were doing and to present about this, one of the presentations that we did was at a judges conference in Minnesota. And so we had state court judges and tribal court judges, and we had Supreme Court justices. I mean, it was just a wide variety. So we gave them a pop quiz on Indian law. They didn't do very well. And it was, you know, I think it was a real eye opener for them about how little that they knew. And it got this conversation started about what we were doing, and really started to make people realize that our tribal courts are legitimate courts, just like tribal courts. I mean, just like state courts, just like federal courts. We're a separate court, just, you know, that we handle the same types of issues, and we may have different approaches, but there should be no less legitimacy there. And so this really not only increased trust and confidence from the other systems in our tribal court system, but also increased trust and confidence that tribal members had in their own system, because we were being recognized and we were doing something good for the community. So what are some of the things that are important if you're going to be creating your own joint jurisdiction courts? And so a lot of this work and the tips that for success, this comes from not only the work that we did with Leech Lake and Cass and Itasca counties, but as part of Project Team, helping other jurisdictions to set up their own courts. And so there were pilot projects in Alaska with the Knights tribe and the Kenai court system, as well as in California, Shingle Springs, Band and Miwok and El Dorado County. And then we also did some work in a non-public law 280 on the federal end of things with Northern Cheyenne and the federal court system. But all of these, a lot of these tips that we get for success come from the learning and sort of the experience of the courts that have come before, and the things that we've learned that can be great lessons for other people that are thinking of doing their own programs. So we've talked about a couple of different ways about how culture and its healing can be integrated in planning and development and implementation. And I think it's really important, because you can't take a program that's sort of a cut and paste from an Ojibwe tribe in northern Minnesota and take that someplace else necessarily, because it's different there. I mean, it's the issues that you're facing may not be the same. Cultural norms are not the same, and there's differences, but the concept is the same, where you have the systems working together. And so you're able to really look at what those local needs are and integrate culture through the whole process in terms of getting your planning team together, how you develop the court, what you call it, what your phases are, how you implement that. And so these other courts were able to use their own values wheels, or whatever their underpinning philosophies and their culture is. They were able to integrate that in and to modify what was done to fit what worked locally. Another thing it's really important in developing these courts is that you really need to have mutual understanding and build trust and respect. And it's hard sometimes when the feelings historically have not been good between state and tribal partners, but you need to be able to get everybody to the table. And it's really important when you're building that mutual understanding and trust that people feel like they have an opportunity to really speak up, that what they have to say will be heard and will be integrated in the planning process. And what people have a hand in developing, they're a lot more likely to help it be successful. And so you're really able to, by creating ground rules and working together like that, to really build that mutual understanding. And to keep in mind that, we always talk about the systems have to collaborate. Well, systems are made up of people. So we are the system. And so we have to build that mutual respect and trust between us as individuals. And everyone needs to feel like they can open up in that planning process and feel respected. And so we talked about how important leadership is, but it's also important as part of that you are inclusive in planning, because that's how you're going to build understanding and trust and that feeling of respect, that people feel like they have a say. And it's important to keep in mind that collaboration is more than cooperation. I mean, I can say, yeah, I'll work with you on that, or I won't stand in your way. But it goes way beyond that to where you're actually creating something new by working together. So it's also important to think beyond the fact that it's not just healing to wellness courts with joint jurisdiction. There's a whole spectrum of programming that can be everything from 2 judges taking the bench together like we did with the wellness courts, to transfer agreements. There's all types of different things that can fall under joint jurisdiction. But really, it's to keep in mind that you're creating this new type of system. It's a new approach to things in what you're trying to develop with a joint jurisdiction court. And it's not what works someplace else. It's what do you use from those tools to meet your own local needs and your court structure, because everybody's at different points in their development, and they have different resources available. They have different needs. And so that's going to determine exactly what that structure looks like and where on that continuum a joint jurisdiction court falls. And so I just hit on this about, it's about building relationships between 2 or more people, and it focuses on common goals. And so instead of thinking about what you can't do together, it's like, pick one thing that you could work together on. And like I said, that you saw the examples of how in northern Minnesota with Leech Lake and our surrounding counties, we just picked one thing, a DWI court, let's try that. And it blossomed into all these other things and was able to go out to help people everywhere. And so it's really important to stay focused on those common goals. It's also really important to have ground rules for communication, because I think you can fall back to those. And if people in the planning process, if there's disagreements or anything, then you have a way to be able to get through that, and ground rules for communication. So those are important things to keep in mind. And I hit on this about that environment of openness. I think it's important to get people involved early in the process and let them come to the table to discuss this and share their ideas, because a lot of times as a judge, I might have some great ideas about what I think will work. But then when you get the people there at the table that actually are doing the work on the ground, there may be things that as a judge, I don't know about that they do. And so we need to know that at the beginning, and people need to feel like they can open up and share those ideas. It's also really important to map the current system and look for opportunities where you could improve. I think a lot of times we found that the state court didn't understand the tribal court process, and the tribal court didn't, people don't always understand what the state system does or can and can't do. And so it's important to map out how people go through the system in both the tribal court and the state court, because really, as you do that, you're going to identify opportunities where things cross and there may be improvements or areas that you can work together. It's also important to measure what you're doing from the very beginning. And we all know, for looking for funding, that what gets measured gets funded. And so whatever you need to do to track your results and who you have coming in and so forth, it's really important to do that from the very beginning, and to be able to measure what you're doing and to share success stories. I think that this is one, we really need to get out and shout it from the rooftops when good things are going on, because that will build more support in your local community for things and for other people that may want to help you in your work going down the line. It's also important to be flexible, because sometimes this can take time, this planning process and overcoming obstacles, and being able to realize that sometimes what you thought it was going to be when you were in your planning process, that on the ground it's a little bit different. So you need to be flexible so that you can respond to that and to make changes as you go along. And it's really important to not be afraid to try something new. I mean, it's so easy. We just do the same thing over and over again. I think they call that the definition of insanity, right? You do the same things over and over again, expecting a different result. And so I think that even though what we do doesn't necessarily work or doesn't work as well as it could, we get scared of trying anything different. So we just don't try anything different. So it's really important to do that, to be able to try something new. To see if that works, because again, we're trying to look at goals, and you need to plan for transitions between staff and leadership, because it will happen, and you got to be ready for a warm handoff. Judges may change, you'll have staff that leaves, and your team, your planning team, your ongoing team, they may change. So it's important to know that that's going to happen, and to have things documented and plan for those transitions so you have a warm handoff. Luckily, there are lots of resources, more and more, that are out there to be able to help with this work. And I've just given you a couple of examples of how things developed with the first joint jurisdiction courts, and how really the sky's the limit in terms of how you can work together. It's what do you need? What are your goals? How do you want to change things? And so if you look at that and stay focused on those common goals, I think you will find a lot of areas that you can work together. But as we found, a lot of times people don't know how to get started, or they don't know that it's going to work where they are. And so it's difficult to kind of get things going in the very beginning. And all week, I know on the Healing to Wellness Court sessions, unfortunately, I haven't been able to tune in like I was hoping for some of the other ones, but there are amazing resources that TLPI has for Healing to Wellness Courts, and for whatever you're looking at doing. If you're looking at exploring a joint jurisdiction court or doing a Healing to Wellness Court for your tribal court, there's many resources that are available. And I would really encourage you to go. There's a web address here on the screen for the Healing to Wellness Courts publications. And as you can see, there's a series of publications that on Healing to Wellness Courts in tribal law, formalizing those, and then also Healing to Wellness Courts intergovernmental collaboration. There's a publication on that. Of course, the key components for tribal Healing to Wellness Courts, and treatment guidelines, the second edition. So that's been updated. There's also a publication on case management that's available. And then the Judicial Bench Book. So this is a great series, and I would really encourage you to go to the TLPI website, and you'll find not only these, but there's amazing resources that are available for folks that are wishing to learn more, either about tribal Healing to Wellness Courts in general, about joint jurisdiction specifically, and how to do your own programs. There's also specific resources that are available about joint jurisdiction work. And I talked about some of the joint jurisdiction programs that had come. There's the active ones that we have now that are working. And so there was in 2022, a publication, the Joint Jurisdiction Courts Needs Assessment Findings. And so if you go to that document, then you can learn about the courts that came after the original joint jurisdiction courts, and some of their experiences and the things that they found that they needed in planning. So that can be very informative for anybody that's thinking of doing their own joint jurisdiction court. Then there's also a publication by Bill Thorne and Suzanne Garcia called Crossing the Bridge, Tribal State Local Collaboration. And there's great tips on how you build those collaborative relationships. There's also the Tribal Court Forums directory that TLPI put out. And for many places, many states and tribal courts have their own in their local jurisdictions, or statewide, they have tribal court forums. And so that's a great way to explore things that you may be able to work together. And I would encourage you, those of you that do have tribal state court forums where you are, that you look to that as a way to maybe get some, at least gauge interest in working together collaboratively, and find out more about things that may be going on in your state and in your areas that may be helpful for program development. And then there's also a publication called Promising Strategies, Tribal State Court Relations. And so that's another publication that came out in March of 2013. And that's pretty helpful in terms of how you can develop some of those relationships. Then there's, as part of Project Team that I told you about, the pilot sites that we put together, I worked with Jennifer Fahey and John Smith, Judge John Smith from Cass County. He was the judge in Cass County that I helped found these first joint jurisdiction wellness courts with. And so we formed Project Team, Together Everyone Achieves More, along with evidence-based for the policy at Oregon Health and Science University and the Center for Evidence-Based Policy. And so we put together this joint jurisdiction manual, the manual for developing joint jurisdiction courts or justice collaborations. I really encourage you to look at this. I think that this has a lot of lessons learned from those pilot sites, And it also goes through the steps that we went through with the pilot sites to help them develop their own collaborations. Then there's 2 law review articles that are also available. The first was from 2008, and that was called The New Face of Justice, Joint Tribal State Jurisdiction. This is when things were brand new, and this was something that it was pretty unheard of then, and no one had been doing that. So it's got a good discussion on tribal courts themselves and some of that basis there. So that's a good resource for how these courts developed to begin with. And then in 2010, there was a follow-up law review article called Building a Legacy of Hope, Perspectives on Joint Tribal State Jurisdiction. And this goes into more detail about hearing from the people that were actually a part of forming these first courts and what their experiences were and kind of advice that they have for other people on how it was working and the benefits that they saw. So those are all some good resources that are available out there for folks that are wanting to learn more. And I want to make sure that we leave a little bit of time here for questions. I don't know if people are going to put those in the chat or if we get people on, but I wanted to try to leave at least a couple of minutes for that. But before we get to that, I want to share some advice that my son gave me. This was years ago, back when he was 9 years old. And I always, for any of you that are out there in cyberland that have heard this before, I apologize, but I have to share this all the time. So when we were first going out to help other jurisdictions set up their own courts and to share this information, dinner time was always a big thing at my family's house. So my son and my husband and I were always having dinner together at the table. And I must have been like obsessing about my PowerPoint or what I was going to do or something. And my son was like, Mom, what are you all worried about? And I said, well, you wouldn't understand, because you're just 9, but I'm trying to get these people to work together. And they don't always get along and they don't understand each other. And so it's really complicated. And he thought about it a minute. He said, Mom, it's easy. You don't need to do all that. And so I said, well, what would you do? What do you mean? And he said, just tell them this. He said, first of all, tell them that they need to be proud of who they are. And he said, because, we got to be proud of who we are. And I thought about it, and it's true, because really, tribal courts don't want to be like state courts, and we're all proud of what we do. We need to be proud of who we are and what we have to offer. My son's second piece of advice that night, he said, tell them to open their minds. And that made sense, because he said, people they just do things over and over the same way. They don't think outside the box. That's pretty good advice there. His third piece of advice was, he said, tell them to learn each other. And I said, don't you mean learn about someone or learn from someone? He said, no. He said, I can do that from reading a book or watching TV. He said, to learn somebody, you got to look them in the eye. And that really says a lot about building these relationships, because we're changing systems, but it's people that have to do the work and we make up the system. So we do need to look each other in the eye and get to know each other. And his last piece of advice that night was to tell people, don't be afraid. And so I would encourage all of you to follow my son's advice, which has been the way we've tried to help other jurisdictions develop their own courts. To be proud of who you are and open your minds and learn each other, and don't be afraid to try something new, because you don't know what that will go on to be able to grow into and expand. So I want to thank you for your time, and that is the end of my presentation. There's the QR code here for the evaluation. And so I really wanted to encourage everybody to do that evaluation, and there's a link in the chat box. And so I'm going to turn it over to Angie now if there's any questions, or she'll wrap us up.
Thank you, Judge Wahwassuck. I will give some time for some questions. If you're in the middle of typing your question, go ahead. In the meantime, I'll just share what wisdom from your son, Judge, and such great advice to follow. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for your presentation, for all the information that you shared. I do think that, just like you said, it's a new system being created to have joint jurisdiction tribal healing to wellness courts. And think that it could be the future of healing to wellness courts, because more and more TLPI gets requests for assistance on the information and how to start that process. So thank you for sharing that. Let me just check the chat one time here. In the meantime,
while you look there, I just want to make one other comment, just while we have a second to keep in mind that I think when you're starting anything like that, and we get the people that are looking into doing this, what we've found is that the tribal court has been strengthened and hasn't given up any of its sovereignty or, giving up anything. And that's why I use the example of the Iditarod race, because you have both, everybody's doing everything on their own, but you're bringing together everything that you have to get to achieve your goals quicker and more effectively and efficiently. And neither system has given anything up and in fact been strengthened by this exercise of tribal sovereignty.
Yes, thank you, Judge. I don't see any questions. Go ahead. If you're typing, keep doing that. On the screen, you'll see a QR code and there's a link in the chat box as well. If you could complete an evaluation on the webinar, we definitely appreciate your feedback. But aside from that, thank you everybody for joining us today. This concludes our 2023 webinar series in recognition of National Treatment Court Month. We hope that you have enjoyed every webinar and have been able to use the information and the work that you do every day. If you do have a suggestion of a topic that you would like to see in a webinar, please share that with TLPI. We're happy to incorporate those ideas. There was only a comment, Judge, about saying thank you. Thank you for your presentation from Ashley.
Well, thank you all for your time, and I really appreciate the time with you today. And if there's ever anything we can do to help, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.